Christian Sederberg of Vicente Sederberg, takes us all the way through Amendment 64 and the task force that he was part of, and what gave us the cannabis industry as we know it in Colorado today. And he also takes us through what he's doing now, which is running the Council on Responsible Cannabis Regulation, which is also a sponsor of this episode, and for that we thank them. Okay, so it's Christian Sederberg time from Vicente Sederberg. Christian Sederberg, thanks so much for giving us some time.
Oh, my pleasure.
So I spent the past 2 years as a New Yorker, as you know, calling it Vicente Sederberg, and you patiently brought me through how to correctly pronounce Brian's last name, and hence the firm's name.
Yeah, I kind of like your version a little bit better, but Brian's not that into it, so,
Exactly. Us New Yorkers, Vicente Sederberg, you know what I mean? So that is an esteemed law firm in the space.
Oh,
and, when did you guys start that thing up?
So we started in May of 2010, but the idea actually came up in late 2009. So in 2010, the legislative session that began in January of 2010, that was the session that our state legislature created the first real robust state-level regulatory system for medical marijuana, something Brian had been working on for a number of years to sort of push the medical marijuana movement forward here, and the culmination of that was the 2010 legislative session, which is when those bills were passed.
And specifically House Bill 1284, is that what we're talking about there?
That's correct. Yep.
Okay. And so the firm then was created in the wake of that.
Yeah, we actually met the day that it passed. We met at a coffee shop right around the corner from here with a few legislators. And it was funny, Brian actually had mentioned that maybe the law firm I was working with at the time, would be helping on regulatory stuff, business stuff. And I actually said, why don't we be partners? And that was it. So it was late May of 2010. We're just getting ready to have our 5th anniversary here, so it's been a wild ride.
There you go. And we just spoke to Ian Sieb, so all of this, he was running around you guys right at that time as well. Mm-hmm. But how did you and Brian meet each other?
It's funny. We actually met through a very good friend of mine is a guy by the name of Taylor Pendergrass. He actually still does some contract work with the NYCLU, which is the local ACLU in New York City, New York State. And he was working in Colorado for the ACLU as a staff attorney. He's one of my best friends from law school. And his group of friends and the attorneys he was frequently working with and frequently around included a number of really interesting and progressive lawyers doing immigration, doing drug policy stuff, and all sorts of interesting stuff. Brian was one of those. Brian Vicente was one of those. And so we actually met through Taylor, and we met because we shared ski condos together, where we'd all pile into a 2-bedroom condo or a 3-bedroom condo up in the mountains and, be the weekend warriors in Denver, go up and ski all weekend, work hard all weekend, then ski all weekend. And so we got into a bunch of really interesting discussions. I thought what he was doing was both, fascinating and really important. So when the time came for there to be the corporate lawyer to come in, Brian approached me because I was the guy that had, he'd been around enough to know that not all of us, all of us corporate folks are the bad guys, in at the time, that was really it was a big concern about everything, not just with medical marijuana or, adult use marijuana, but really, just sort of a lot of those issues that were going on at the time, just discussions about corporate America. And so I was the cool corporate lawyer, I guess you'd say. I wouldn't necessarily agree with that, but that was my intro to those guys. So.
Got it. And then what does that mean for what is cool corporate lawyer? Fine, but what did they see in terms of you and your corporate law? What were you working on specifically?
So I did a bunch of entrepreneurial stuff, and specifically, I was helping some of these attorneys that were doing really good, really progressive work in, like I said, immigration, other things. I'd help some of their friends and family, boyfriends, girlfriends, set up yoga studios and some other real small business ideas, but just help them do a lot of the work it takes to start a business. That's what I did at my previous firm. It's a big part of what I did in law school. I worked for the Entrepreneurial Law Clinic up in Boulder, which was just helping startups get off the ground, and sort of move forward. Justin's almond butter and the Justin's family of products was one of our clients up at the Entrepreneurial Law Clinic. So we'd help startups get going. I love that stuff. I think it's really fascinating. And, this industry has been a series of startups that have been going on for the last, 7-8 years, really a lot more in the last 5 years. And then obviously the last 2 years have been a ton more work in that sort of corporate formation, corporate guidance, business planning stuff. So when I say, I was the cooler, it was really because I was just helping a lot of people with, start small businesses that were never necessarily intending on becoming large businesses, these yoga studios and other things. So.
Well, Justin's has got a little bit of size to it.
Yeah, right? Yeah. Well, that was one of the success stories out of the University of Colorado School of Law, where I went to law school up in Boulder. Mm-hmm. That was one of the success stories of this program, where we do clinical work, but it was corporate business clinical work for kids in college, kids in business school, people in the Boulder community that were looking for help with their startups.
So, University of Colorado Law School. Mm-hmm. Why did you choose that? What was the, focus in law school? You said what you were doing outside of it. Well, was there any kind of specificity to the degree?
So I picked the University of Colorado because I grew up in Denver. I'm from Colorado. I'm actually the second of 6 kids. All my family lives here. My brothers and sisters, nieces and nephews. I'd left for 4 years to go to school in San Diego for undergrad, and I definitely mm-hmm. wanted to come back. CU worked for a couple years before going to law school, back here in Denver. But CU is a great school. The law school is it's got a very good reputation. At the time, it wasn't that expensive. Now it's obviously a lot of schools have become a lot more expensive, but at the time it was a really good value. And as far as focus goes, I went in very interested in the law generally, but also, I have a background in finance, corporate finance, real estate. That's what I was doing for a couple of years before. That's what my degree, my business administration degree focused on finance. So I always liked the business side of it, and being not the adversarial lawyer, the lawyer you see on TV, but more of a deal person and someone who worked on entrepreneurship and business startups and development. That's what I try to focus on with my coursework and other things and clinical stuff I did when I was in law school.
Got it. Okay. And before that, you kind of just mentioned San Diego. Mm-hmm. What school was that? University
of San Diego, the Toreros. So it's a private school in Linda Vista, but I lived on Mission Beach, down by the roller coaster. For anyone who's familiar with that, Mission Beach is a fantastic place. I actually vacationed there as a kid. I went there thinking I was going to mm-hmm. be a marine biologist, as many people did, but figured out pretty quickly that the labs and other things were distracting from my time surfing and doing other fun things, and my heart really wasn't in it. So I started focusing on business and finance.
Got it. But business, finance, corporate finance, what got you into that? Because if you're having fun, surfing and stuff, what was the other side of the brain telling you? How did you make that foray?
I think a lot of it was a good fit for me. I just like business. I like business. I like the startup. I was in school in the 90s. There was a lot of the tech startup stuff happening. I had professors that were involved in tech startups and other things. And, I think business appealed to me because it's just sort of how I'm programmed. Finance mm-hmm. specifically because, I sort of like the accounting is really the numbers and balancing out and everything else. Finance is more of a practice of, predicting the future, or at least, trying to develop models for future revenue growth and all these different things. I just found that to be very interesting. And I had a couple of really good professors early on that steered me that way.
Got it. Did that come from your folks? What did your folks do?
Oh, no, not really. My father is an anesthesiologist here in town. My mother was a high school teacher before she was charged with raising 4 hellion boys and 2 lovely girls. So, in a way, my family's, most people in my family are in the medical field. doctors, nurses. I'm sort of the black sheep of the family as the lawyer. But my dad said as long as I didn't do, medical malpractice law, he could probably live with my decision to be a lawyer. And that's actually a joke. They were very, very supportive of me sort of going outside the box. And a lot of people assumed I'd become a doctor just like my dad. And my older brother did that. And, I'd started out kind of looking at that path, but I'm sort of a different, I think a little bit differently than some of my other family members that focus on that. So.
Got it. And then let's do this. The kids. So the oldest is one of the boys, and he's a doctor.
Yep.
Then you're a lawyer.
Yep.
And so if Jewish mothers listening will be very pleased with those choices. What about 3 through 6?
So yeah, 3 he's a general contractor, and he does a lot of like custom home stuff, and he builds really cool. Does a lot of carpentry work and builds really cool, custom basements and houses and redoes stuff. And he's a guy that works with his hands, and he does a wonderful job of it. And he's done some work, in our office here. He's fixed up a bunch of stuff, but he also does, by now I've got him working on several people in the industry, and also my colleagues doing, helping them fix up their place. The brother below that is he's in the catering business. He's really good at he's sort of a jack of many trades. He is an animal lover, so he worked with animals for a while as a vet tech, and has done a bunch of stuff. He really just follows his heart, which is he's a really cool kid. He actually was my personal assistant for about 6 months, which is from what I'm told, but I don't understand, not the easiest job in the world. But he lasted for 6 months at that doing that gig about a year ago. But yeah, he's happy doing his catering stuff, and he's actually caters our fundraisers and does some other stuff for us. And then you have the 2 girls. One's actually a high school Spanish teacher in a little bit north of Denver. She's been the one that's asked the toughest questions in my family about marijuana legalization and what will happen. How does this impact high schools and kids and everything else? And then my youngest sister's in nursing school. She just graduated from Santa Clara University last year. And so we have a kind of a broad mix. But 2 of my 2 sisters-in-law are both nurses. One does cancer stuff. The other is just floats around but does really, really good work. And that's what I meant by the medical side of the family: doctors and nurses and everything else. So
it runs through. It runs deep.
Yeah.
So on those a couple of those things. So you mentioned the office with the brother that's in construction. I've seen that office. It is stunning. Do you just take folks through what it is?
Sure. So it's called the Creswell Mansion. It's a historic mansion. It's 120, 130 years old. It was built by a steam baron from New York who came here bringing the promise of steam heating. Many New Yorkers will be familiar with this, and people that see the steam coming out of grates and stuff. So he brought that sort of technology here. He built this amazing house. And it's been a number of other things over the course of years. It's been a restaurant. It's been a jazz club. At one point, it was the A&R spot for Denver bands and other things. They'd have these huge blowout parties here. So it's got a really good vibe. It's a really cool place. It's actually a relatively new addition to what we do, because the campaign headquarters for Amendment 64, SAFER, which is Mason DeVert, Sensible Colorado, which was Brian Vicente, but they're the nonprofit that we ran on the medical stuff, and then our law firm, we're all about a block away. And on the campaign, Betty Aldworth from SSDP, Rochelle Shalene Title was with us. We had a bunch of really amazing people working with us, and the campaign ended and we won. And I was walking to lunch trying to figure out a way to keep all these people together and sort of make sure that this amazing team of people that worked on Amendment 64, we'd at least be able to stay near each other and keep sort of the collaborative thing going, so we don't just fall back into being boring lawyers again. And so I'm walking back from lunch a block, and this, they were putting up the for rent sign, and I basically told them to take it down, so I could have a couple minutes to convince Brian and Josh that this was the spot we needed to be. So that's when we brought over Betty Aldworth, who'd left the campaign. She became the deputy director of the National Cannabis Industry Association. Set her up in here. Mason DeVert had the communications director for Marijuana Policy Project. his office is in here. And it used to be that the National Cannabis Industry Association full headquarters was actually in the back. They've moved a block up the street because we've been growing and we needed to sort of keep our people together, but we're still about a block and a half away. And, the other thing is it's right by the Capitol building. We do a lot of work at the state capitol here. It's about 2 blocks away. So it's become a great home. And, we've had many very interesting parties and fundraisers. One of the shining moments being during the Drug Policy Alliance conference a few years back. We had a really amazing party that, a room full of heroes and idols and everything else. And, officials from other countries. And, it was really sort of definitely a high point in my career in life to have my dad and the chief of staff of the president of Uruguay hanging out talking about marijuana reform, while Andrew Livingston, our policy analyst, is talking about the future of marijuana and rolling a joint. It was really a cool time. So it's become a great home.
Absolutely. And thank you for painting the picture of that party and making us all jealous. As far as because my foray into the office came through your brother, let's talk about your teacher sister who has asked the toughest questions. Mm-hmm. What has she asked you and what are your answers? Let's unpack that a little bit.
Sure. So obviously she's skeptical. It's tough for people. Teachers have a tough time with the state of our sort of education system and the school district she's in. You got classrooms that are very full. You're dealing with a bunch of challenges with kids already, and it's a classic sort of critique of what's going on is that, well, by making marijuana more available in our society and lowering sort of the perceptions of harm and other things, you're going to see a lot more teens using marijuana, and that's going to be one more challenge for them in terms of being a successful teacher that can help them move beyond high school into college or into a vocation, and it's a challenge, and that's what a lot of educators and people have concerns about. And she had that concern. She tells me about kids that use marijuana in her, that come to school high or whatever. My answer to it, and I think she believes in what we're doing and understands it. But the answer is that marijuana didn't just suddenly appear when Amendment 64 passed, nor when House Bill 1284 passed. It's something that's been in our society and in our high schools for generations now, in a pretty significant way. I could get marijuana very, very easily when I went to my Catholic Jesuit high school here in Denver. It was much more difficult for me to get alcohol. Marijuana was always around. What we're trying to do is take it away from, take it out of sort of the underground market, where they don't have any interest in carding people, and putting it into a market where, regulated businesses, professional business people pay taxes, and they don't want to lose their licenses, and so they have to be diligent about not selling to minors.
Absolutely. And then what is her take? She asks the questions, you give those answers, which sound completely reasonable, of course, and then what's her response?
Her response is, time's going to tell, and I think over time, I think it has, she certainly said that, it's perhaps the surprise in this is, the discussions that people are having, and like a much more honest discussion with students and with parents and other things about this. But at this point, the world, as is the case with many different predictions from many different people about how this would impact Colorado in a negative way, those just haven't come to pass. And so, cautiously optimistic, but she's smart. She's a lot like my mom, and that is a wonderful thing and a challenging thing, but she's never going to let up, and we're certainly going to continue to have discussions, but in general, she supports what we're doing.
So you mean that she's like your mother in more ways than both of them being school teachers at one point. It sounds like she's maybe a little relentless. What are the themes there?
My mom is an amazing person in the fact that she was able to raise 4 boys that were absolutely running in every direction and lighting as many fireworks, doing as many things as possible to get in trouble. She kept us all wrangled, and then the 2 girls, she's raised a really wonderful group of people. But in order to do that, you have to be, a stern person and a very organized person and a person not afraid to tell people, what you think. And that's certainly, what my mom is, and my sister. It's a wonderful trait. It was a all tongue in cheek and saying, like my mom. But, the big joke is that in high school, all my friends called my mom, her name is Jean Sederberg. My mom, they all called her Mean Jean because I was always getting grounded for doing this or that or whatever. But you got to keep if there's this many kids running around, the only way to, you got to keep them in line. So she was tough but fair.
There you go, tough but fair, and you brought up your Catholic Jesuit upbringing. That's something that Trip Kieber also talked about. Mm-hmm. Did you know that he had that same upbringing?
Yeah, we've talked about it a little bit. We've never really gotten into it, but it's a funny thing, Colorado. My mom's German Catholic from St. Louis, so I was an altar boy. I went to Catholic school, grade school, high school, college. But the Jesuit education. It's a different type of Catholicism. The current Pope's a Jesuit, but certainly a more liberal wing of the Catholic Church. And we talked about drug policy issues. We talked about social justice issues a lot when I was in high school. And these themes, things that I actually have the privilege and pleasure of working on now, were issues that we discussed. The impacts of these policies, drug policies, just criminal justice policies on poor communities. That's it's an underlying theme of a lot of what the Jesuits do, and it's certainly created it's a big part of who I am. Not necessarily, I'm not a practicing Catholic,
right?
In the same way my mom is, or my grandma. These are very strict. They're very go to church every week, if not frequently during the week. The influence of the Catholic upbringing on me was really sort of the values, and then the Jesuits are wonderful, amazing teachers.
So which values? Because you spoke about what you discussed and what you learned, but mm-hmm. what values do you think that you took from that?
Yeah, valuing and respecting people for who they are. And when I was in high school, a lot of people can think about the Catholic Church and think about gay marriage and the challenges there, how they've approached the issue of, the issue generally. And, when I was in high school, Jesuit priests were telling us, look, this is a difficult thing for the church, and it comes from a lot of, of doctrine and other things, but, you got to ask yourself why someone would be making a choice to alienate themselves from everyone they've known their whole lives, and by deciding, quote unquote, deciding that they're gay, they challenged our belief system in terms of, what assumptions we should make about, who people are, and really judging people based upon, it's really a content of character judgment. And, that is the key to really that education and sort of placing the value on education itself, and not education for the sake of, this or that, but education for the sake of knowledge, and seeking knowledge. And, definitely it's a wonderful institution, and I'm sure some people would disagree with me. And I know that it's organized religion is not necessarily the easiest topic to bring up, but the Jesuits are good people. And I think a lot of people are seeing it in the current Pope and some of the things that he's doing.
Yeah, no, it's certainly not the easiest thing to talk about. That's why we try to talk about it as often as possible. And then after religion, you're not supposed to talk about politics. So let's talk about the campaign for Amendment 64.
Sounds good.
So how did you join? I mean, you were kind of a key voice there. Take us through, where you started on that campaign.
Sure.
The early days.
Yeah. So when Brandon and I formed the firm, I'll have to talk about my mom again because it's sort of a funny part of this. But we formed the firm. I told my old firm I was leaving, and then I had to go tell my parents. So I approached my parents and said, we're going to start this firm. It's going to focus on medical marijuana pretty much exclusively, this new law. My mom said, well, it makes sense. It's a new industry, it's a new thing that's happening. Certainly I see it in the paper and on the news. She's like, and you're not legalizing marijuana. So, and I was like, well, actually, the whole plan is that, we are, Mason and Tvert, Steve Fox, Brian Vicente had positioned themselves as leaders in Colorado in moving this issue forward. This started in 04, 05. when Mason moved here and founded Safer, and then when Brian founded Sensible Colorado right out of law school. So they positioned themselves well to be the people that were going to run that campaign and work on that issue. Obviously, Prop 19 was still going strong in California at that point. This was, early 2010. That election was that next November. A lot of people thought that was going to be, a successful campaign. It's incredibly challenging. California's an incredibly challenging place to do anything. They did a great job. Obviously, came up a little short, and that's when, the focus shifted to Colorado and Washington. And that came immediately to, our firm, through Brian and then Mason. And, Brian and Mason have been sharing offices for years. Nothing really changed when we started the law firm. Mason was just around the corner in the office about 10 feet from my door. So that's where it started. And my role in it was really a lot of my role, and Josh's role at the beginning was to focus intensely on the newly regulated medical marijuana system and make sure that thing kept going, and that we would be able to, so during the course of drafting Amendment 64, which was it was Steve Fox and Brian Vicente, Josh Capel and I would give a lot of feedback in terms of how do we make this work? How does it actually, function, as opposed to sort of an ivory tower approach where, that sounds like a good thing to do. So that was my role early on. When the campaign got, full bore going, Betty Aldworth got hired, a couple other campaign staffers, Chris Wallace, some other folks came on. My role was really kind of as a volunteer and, an advocate in terms of talking to people in the industry about why Amendment 64 made sense for these medical marijuana businesses in terms of a transition, why it was not going to be a threat to their businesses, and why we could, why it was important that we move forward. Also it was debates, I'd go out and debate different people, and I debated district attorneys from different areas and other government officials and just people that were on the other side, on the no campaign side. My role in the campaign really kicked in, a lot after the election too, where I became, the governor named me to be the task force representative for the campaign. And then, my specialty in a way is implementation. It's implementing these laws after they've been passed. So, that's sort of the full spectrum of my involvement with that campaign.
Absolutely, and I really want to talk about the task force, but you did bring up kind of debating and dissenting voices. There were some important voices. Ian Sieb just brought this up. There were some important voices that were on the other side of Amendment 64. Take us through that.
Sure. Pretty much every elected official and editorial board in the state of Colorado. with two exceptions.
I'm saying business leaders.
Oh yeah, and business leaders too. Yeah, of course. But yeah, on the a lot of businesses, it was a really interesting time because these are people that we developed relationships with, and I developed personal relationships with, and a lot of them were very concerned about what would happen if this passed. And they say we're finally getting our feet on the ground. We're finally starting to and fair point, make back these big investments and actually have a stable environment where they could work after putting their necks out there for a long time. We'd gotten some decent guidance that moving forward, we'd be able to continue the medical marijuana program. And it was a big question mark about what happens if Amendment 64 passed. And, my response was very simple. You shouldn't be upset that it's on the ballot and that it might pass. You should be worried if it doesn't pass. If it doesn't pass, it's a referendum on marijuana, and it's going to be taken as a signal from the federal government that the people of Colorado don't want this sort of commercial emergence of marijuana. And if we were to lose the campaign, I don't know what the federal response would have been, but I think it could have been really bad. I think it could have been something that could have led to another significant pushback or crackdown. Fortunately, it went the other way, and it went the other way in a big way. So, it really set a mandate and a precedent for moving this program forward. And, that I've never faulted anyone who was critical of the campaign for any reason. I certainly tried to win everyone over, but I couldn't blame people that were struggling for a long time, starting to finally feel comfortable and make some money. That another disruption in their business. I got it. It would be very difficult. That being said, I think that most people would tell you that it's been a very, even though it's been a rocky road, it's been a very positive thing, and it's really propelled Colorado far ahead of any of the other states, even the states that have also passed these laws. We just have a much more robust regulatory system, a much better educated public, better educated consumer, and we're really in a good position. But it's been a wild 4 years for anyone in the business, 5 years for anyone in the business, and I never would fault anyone for not supporting it. Although I still wanted their support, and I get pushed really, really hard.
Absolutely, and you brought up don't know what would have happened if it didn't pass, and I mean, well, Prop 19 not passing in California, that industry in that state is still reeling from that.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, there was. I mean, you can't tie the two together. It's not. There's no real evidence of cause and effect. But right after it didn't pass, we certainly saw more aggressive attorneys, U.S. attorney involvement in the industry and at the local level. Because like I said, it's in many ways these laws, they're referendum. It's a referendum on marijuana itself, not necessarily just adult use marijuana. But before Amendment 64, the criticism was these are a bunch of 25-year-old snowboarders with quote unquote back pain, and they're that's what medical marijuana is. And like there's nothing in Amendment 20, which is our state medical marijuana constitutional amendment from 2000. There's nothing in Amendment 20 that says that there would be stores or that there would be product companies and all this stuff. Well, now we voted on that, and if you're a 25-year-old snowboarder, regardless of if you have back pain or not, you can be a lawful user, right? And also these stores and that system of commercial production, commercial sales, wholesales of infused products, that was also endorsed, resoundingly by the voters in that election. So basically it undercut all the criticisms that there were about the medical program.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. So then let's get to it. Let's talk about the task force. Let's talk about the first few meetings and kind of setting that up. Well, what was that like?
Yeah, well, that was a pretty wild time, So, I mean, there was, the task force was about 25 people, give or take. I think it was an incredibly thoughtful and effective approach that the governor, so I give the governor a ton of credit for putting it together. It was not an easy decision, as many people just kind of think, oh yeah, of course, that's the kind of thing you do. It's actually very outside the box at the time, and Jack Finlaw, the governor's chief legal counsel at the time, and Barbara Broll, who was then and is still now the director of the department, or the executive director of the Department of Revenue, as co-chairs, they brought us all together. There was 25 or so. I think I was the only one. I represented the campaign. There was a consumer advocate that, a couple people from Normal were on, as the representatives of the consumer advocate. Besides that, I would say that people were either neutral or against us. So I remember the first meeting, everyone went around and introduced themselves and sort of got to me. And, I said, well, my name's Christian Sederberg. I'm an attorney here. I worked on the campaign. I represent the campaign here. And I'm pretty sure that I'm the only one that wants to be here, So, that was the first meeting, and I pushed back pretty hard. And it was, my approach on all things government relations, or all things, that it is and will continue to be a hearts and minds campaign. And even, our biggest opponents, we have the luxury of being right. So, you don't have to be overly aggressive in your approach, although at times I'm sure I was on 2 hours of sleep, whatever. But, the approach has to be hammering on the fact that the election's over, hammering on the fact that, this is a regulatory policy, discussion. This is a statutory regulatory policy discussion. We are going to address issues through regulation and statutory language, not through a binary approach of legal or not. And this is healthcare. These are healthcare issues. These are not, criminal issues. And that was what we stayed on point. And, that was really the focus of those initial sessions. The governor appointed, that there was 4 work groups: regulatory work group, consumer safety, social issues work group. I forget the other 2, criminal justice work group, something else I should remember. But I was named the co-chair of the consumer safety, social issues work group, which I always tell people was the punishment for being the campaign guy, because it was, it was basically the work group that was charged with what are we going to do to protect kids, to protect public safety, really all of the very difficult issues. So in a way, I'm glad I was on it, but it was also, a very challenging environment. That small work group, which included people that were not on the main task force, I would say that was stacked with people that were literally on the No campaign, or people that were very closely affiliated with the No campaign, probably stacked 2 or 3 to 1 against us.
Amazing. What it did do, putting you in that position, was set you up perfectly so that you could well defend the movement, if you will, to your sister.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
But when do you think you started to change kind of hearts and minds? If everyone was stacked against you from day one, where did it start to loosen up? What was it?
It's actually really interesting. I think that the hearts and it happened in these work groups, because what happened was you had a bunch of thoughtful advocates, myself, and a number of other really, really intelligent people that have worked on this issue for a long time. We had some other people from the industry. Kevin Fisher, who's a business owner up in Steamboat Springs, was on it with me. Did a great job. You had a bunch of activists, Ron Nixon, Terry Robnett, all these people that were coming and giving their feedback. So I was up there, sort of defending and talking about these things. Our opponents were, railing against the concept, and a lot of times they were, many times they were there in good faith, but at times they would just go off the rails about how bad an idea this was. And then during the testimony phase, the people would come up that were the advocates. They'd sort of help to flesh out some of the issues and really have, really good discussions. And I think what happened was the people sort of that assumed that we were going to be the crazy hair on fire, people in those meetings. The opposite was true. It was actually the people that were against this that were showing up saying this is the worst thing ever, and these people should be ashamed of themselves. We were actually the ones trying to solve problems. We were the ones that were willing to, negotiate and understood the value of compromise. And I think that's where it happened. It was during these work groups, and then during the main task force was more of a let's report on all the work groups and vote on stuff. But it was these work groups where, I remember Jack Finlaw at one point and some other folks that are government people kind of saying, wow, you guys, it's a group of young people, who are incredibly passionate about something and who are incredibly smart and well prepared, and it's really not what we expected. And I think that was really from a government level and everything else, that was where hearts and minds were changing. Hearts and minds in terms of marijuana being available out of stores really changed after the medical marijuana program came into place in 2010, and really nothing, the predictions of the sky is falling didn't happen. I mean, a lot of this is an expectations game too. If you're on the other side and you say this is going to be the worst thing ever, and you set expectations that literally, the day that the first store opened, the fire in, brimstone and kids were going to be, drivers will be crashing into each other on the streets. Like if you set that expectation, you set yourself up for failure. We recognize that. We knew that. We also know that we're right, and so we can be very, very honest about what we say and try to convince people. I also think we have a very unique set of people in this state, and like the people that worked on the campaign are some of the nicest, most genuine, humble people you'll ever meet. And all of the advocates that we have, I mean, there's some people that are really very fiery and get into it, but like it's a very thoughtful, kind, assertive, and at times intense group of people, and I think that's very compelling to policymakers and others.
Yeah, no, I mean, as far as my foray in here in the past couple of years, what is remarkable is how boring you all are.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. We're trying. Look, our goal. I know. Our goal is to make this boring. Yeah. My goal is actually to make it boring, particularly for the press. That's
Indeed.
A stated goal.
Indeed.
So.
Oh, look, it's a well-run industry. Oh well. As you mentioned that Governor Hickenlooper was extremely thoughtful in the way that he put the task force together, and you might have already answered this question through your answer of the last question. Is it because he put opponents on the same committees? Is it why did you use that word thoughtful? You can't have so basically there were ground rules. The ground rules were we're not going to relitigate Amendment 64, even though, of course, we relitigated it on a number of occasions. But, this is not about relitigating this. And it's also like I was against it. But Governor Hickenlooper, personally against it, ran ads against it.
spoke publicly against it. But the voters had spoken, and he bought two of his very talented members of his staff to help run this thing, and then the people that he named to be on these, both the work groups and the task force itself, they really reflected a very broad sector of our society, and it was cops, chiefs of police, you had labor, you had business interests, you had local business interests, you had local government officials. I mean, you had really a large, just citizen advocates on both sides of the issue, people on the yes campaign, people on the no campaign. You really brought together what, a group of stakeholders, so that you could, at the end of it, say, even though these are the compromise we did, or this is where it all ends up, everyone has a stake in it. Everyone has buy-in into the end product, even if they don't agree with the policy itself. And that was incredibly, incredibly important.
And where do you think the kind of rubber hit the road? If day one we were, it was inflamed conversation, and then through the working groups we kind of settled into, okay, I can hear you now. Mm-hmm. Where do you think it kind of leveled off and actually became useful and productive?
Yeah, I mean, it actually happened relatively quickly because there wasn't time. Mm-hmm. It was a very time-intensive thing. I mean, the task force was put together in December, early January, and we had to have a report with recommendations to the legislature before it ended in May. So, I mean, it was a very intense, long days and nights, meetings all over the city in the Front Range, and on many different issues going on multiple times a day. And then large task force meetings. I mean, there was no time, and it happened very quickly. I would say after the one or two meetings in, people were getting serious about it because, it wasn't. It was, you need to get work done. You had a very strict set of goals to achieve, and you had to get there. So, really by the end is the rubber. I mean, ultimately the rubber hit the road when the task force when that was given to the legislature. And then it kind of started everything over again. The legislature was not going to be bound by the task force. They were simply going to take those recommendations and work with them to create what is now, the structure of the industry, which was a series of additional bills that were passed in the 2013 legislature. That was a whole nother adventure and interesting process, and incredibly intense process that happened right after the task force was the legislative process, and it's sort of round two after the task force.
Yeah. Let's actually do that. So the task force, you gave your recommendations to the legislature when?
I think our legislative recommendations went in sometime in March. It might have even been early April. I'd have to check. Okay. And that gave us a relatively short period of time. So what happened was the legislature then had the joint. I mean, you know what it was? It was actually the very end of February. And then what happened was there was a joint. The joint committee was put together. Representative Dan Pabon and Senator Sherry Jean were, and a couple of those were the two Democrats. And then we had two Republicans, and they sort of put together this joint select committee that sort of went through each of the recommendations and made an additional sort of, tweak some things, change some things of those task force recommendations that were given to the legislature. And then that created the two bills. One was the bill with all the controversial stuff. The other was the bill with the sort of consensus bill, we called it. That was the consensus recommendations, and the other stuff was sort of the controversial stuff. Started those in the different houses of our state legislature because of the timing. So we're talking about multiple committee meetings every day, political shenanigans, people trying to, Democrats and Republicans, frankly, trying to unwind or undo some of the work that had been done, or frankly all of the work in one particular case that had been done. And it was a very rapid and very intense process. We had, the campaign had 4 lobbyists that were working on it for us, that were I was supervising the 4 lobbyists that were working on it. Yeah, the marijuana industry group had their multiple lobbyists, that we were collaborating with, Cannabis Business Alliance. And then you had Smart Colorado, the No campaign essentially hired the, Brownstein, Hyatt, Farber, Schreck, which is the biggest and baddest Denver law firm. And they hired their government relations team to really kind of be the spoiler, if you will, or work on the other side of the issue against us. And then you had to deal with all the local government lobbyists and everything else. I mean, it was really a gargantuan, it was relatively new to me. And I only am starting to appreciate now how significant of a task it was. And, I'm incredibly proud of all the people that worked on it.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're talking about 9 months. So because January 1st, 2014, we kicked the doors open. You give your recommendations February 2013. They set up the Joint Select Committee, and then you've got all of these voices kind of submitting to these two bills over those just few months.
Well, and actually, so that bill passed on those bills passed on the last day of the legislative session, which was somewhere around May 7th or 8th. So that happened all in like a very compressed period of time. Then we had to do all of the regulatory work that was authorized by those laws. We had to do all of the regulatory work necessary to get those stores open by January 1. And we had to get every local government to push forward too. Again, I look back on it, I'm like, I don't know how we did it. If I had that task in front of me now, it was an ignorance is bliss sort of thing. But so many people stepped up and did such an awesome job. It was, it was a very, very, it's one of those moments where at the time I think it was probably a living nightmare for me a lot of the time. But looking back, it's definitely the proudest moment of my career.
Without question. I mean, absolutely. Worldwide, Colorado is looked upon as a shining example because of the, not only those bills, but then the regulations that came out of it, which were rolled out over the period of just 6 months.
Yeah.
And so, what do you think the key? What do you think the key was in those 6 months, from or 6+ months, May 7th or 8th through January 1? What were the keys?
I mean, I think the key really was at the state level. Barbara Broll being so heavily involved in the task force was incredibly important. Task force that legislation, that she obviously was down there a lot. But Louis Koski and Ron Kamerzel, who are, Ron does not work for the Marijuana Enforcement Division. He's the head of all enforcement for all divisions under revenue, which includes marijuana, medical marijuana, the gaming system, alcohol, all these things. Ron is an amazing person, incredibly thoughtful person, very genuine person, very good at understanding nuts and bolts issues, but also policy. And then Louis Koski, who'd been running, who'd been at the Marijuana Enforcement Division since it started, who I met back in one of my first meetings in 2010. He's now the head of the Enforcement Division. Those guys are incredibly smart and incredibly, they work more hours. I think the joke was how in 2013, I was talking to Ron and Louis at like 10 o'clock on like a Tuesday night, and Louis said, "Yeah, Ron just announced that he's canceling Christmas to all the employees." And to hear that from obviously he was joking, but to hear that from like a state officials, I mean, that's how hard those guys were working. Jordan Wellington, who's actually now an attorney with our law firm and runs our compliance group, Jordan was actually working for the Democrats during the legislative session. And that's where I met him. Was basically he was the gatekeeper for us lobbying and trying to get additions to the bill. He was in charge of all the marijuana bills for the Democrats. So he actually was a contract employee. He left the legislature and was hired by the Marijuana Enforcement Division because he was so knowledgeable about the statutes themselves to get in there and help write that regulatory structure. So I think that was a very smart decision by them. And it certainly worked out, I think, very well. Kelly Rosenberg and some of the other attorneys general over there, these guys worked incredibly hard. And that's what the state success, it came a lot. Again, it was a lot of people. There were work groups and other things to get these regulations done. But those guys put in so much time and effort, the state people. At the local level, it was businesses. It was businesses going to their city councils and county commissions and pushing for those cities to enact the will of the voters. And, Denver got it going right at January 1st. Some other towns and cities did too. Boulder was about 4 or 5 months behind. They were a little bit slower to get on board. Pueblo County, Sal Pace, running for U.S. Congress, lost that race the same day we won Amendment 64. He took a vacancy seat at the Pueblo County Commission and immediately said this is going to be the next big industry in Pueblo County, and has been an incredible advocate at the state and local level, at the state level, but particularly at the local level to create the next, the next real, call it a Napa Valley or Sonoma Valley of of marijuana, and that's really what Sal did too. So it's just really a sort of an aligning of a bunch of different things in the universe that made all of this happen. But it's luck is where preparation and execution meet. So it was a very, very interesting historic time.
Without question. And you're still working on regulations. I know that you're the chairman of the Council on Responsible Cannabis Regulation. What are you doing with that? Why did you guys start that? You got a lot of big names on that.
Sure. Yeah, it's it's another very smart move by Steve Fox, who's a visionary, and in my opinion, one of the primary reasons that marijuana is legal in Colorado and elsewhere. But Steve was a founder of SAFER. Steve was a founder of the National Cannabis Industry Association, and then this idea, which we'd all been talking about, was that it's, if you look at sort of the way Colorado went and the way Washington State went, and I love my Washington friends. Allison Holcomb's a good friend. All these, I really have a ton of respect for what they did up there. But our sort of approach, which is to make sure that you involve the businesses that are going to be impacted by big regulatory decisions, ballot initiatives, these types of things. There has to be a voice of the reasonable business people at the table. And it's not that voice has been denied, but as we proceed going forward, business interests are coming in, exerting a lot more influence in all these processes. So we really wanted to put together a group of people that, that were sort of the, really respectable, thoughtful, collaborative people in the industry and leaders, thought leaders on this council, and really help to address issues, both in terms of we tour people through their facilities that come from all over the world. We've had Danish Parliament, members of Parliament. We've had Colombian lawmakers. We've had lawmakers from all throughout Latin America. We've had the French and German delegations. We've had groups that are not that friendly to what we're doing, but we don't pull any punches through that council. And we have a bunch of different state people coming through, and it's really a way to show that what people call the Colorado model is something that can work. But the Colorado model, as I've said before, is not exactly our system. It's simply the ability to bring together stakeholders, create systems, create guidelines for collaboration to get to where you need to be, with a very practical and pragmatic grounding in, this is how these businesses run, this is what our flaws are, this is where our strengths are, do with it what you will for your particular situation, and we'll help you get there.
Right. And so, if that has been the consistent focus, and it obviously will be, what is the next thing? We've done a good job here of talking through, getting to this point and then continuing the conversation in the same voice, as you just went through. What's next?
I mean, what's next is 2016 it's the year. And, we're going to have ballot initiatives on in a number of states, including California, Massachusetts. I mean, we're talking big, very influential states. California is obviously the big one. What's next is, as doing whatever we can, just from our experience, to help facilitate and assist those guys out there in any way we can. I mean, that is I've said it before, I'll say it here. The heart of the movement is California, and that's where it all started, and that's where you have some of the great leaders, heroes, mentors of the medical marijuana movement, and just the movement generally. It's a big deal, and it's a very, very large state with a very, a bunch of diffuse interests, and that's the big one. When California goes, that's it's a sign that federal regulation, or federal descheduling, not a full federal legalization, but a real shift in federal policy, will be very close, in our opinion. And so for me, in the short term, it's making sure that things still run smoothly here. It's constantly tweaking the Colorado system. It's helping any state, any government, anywhere understand what's happening, and it's helping get these initiatives passed in any of these states in whatever way we can. But for me, I mean, the goal is pretty simple. It's changing federal law. and it's removing marijuana from its place on the Controlled Substances Act, and it's ending the federal prohibition of marijuana. That's our law firm's stated goal, or our stated mission belief, is that any person in jail with a conviction, anything for a non-violent marijuana offense, is a political prisoner, and our goal is going to be to end that, and that is the federal law.
Got it. And so if just changing federal law completely, in this light is the ultimate goal, and obviously taking it off Schedule 1, cannabis off Schedule 1, what's first, do you think? What would be the first little step, federally? So we understand California, yes, check, okay, fine. Mm-hmm. Is taking it off Schedule 1 first, or is it just, how do you think it'll go?
I think, the scheduling, the descheduling or rescheduling issue is a very interesting one, in that it's not good enough. It's definitely, it will be an okay step if it's removed, if it's moved down to Schedule 3. If it's moved to Schedule 2, it doesn't really change much in terms of banking and taxing issues that we have, but it certainly opens it up for research, which is very important. Right. If it moved to Schedule 3 temporarily, that would be fine. But the ultimate goal, that is what could happen first. But again, it really depends on what happens with these elections. I mean, I think a lot of people try to predict when this will happen at the federal level. And it's good to predict things, right? But it's better to help make your predictions come true, to manifest your predictions. Mm-hmm. And I think that this is going a lot quicker than a lot of people anticipated. And that means that, the involvement of very traditional businesses in this space, and sort of the interest nationally, internationally, and the reaction from people that this isn't really as bad as I thought. And actually they're starting to understand the policy reasons and everything else. Things could happen a lot quicker than a lot of people think. But I think that the natural first step would be an Obama leaving office, rescheduling down to 2 or 3, preferably 3, but that, like I said, that's a temporary fix. All the issues that we face, banking, taxes, all these things, they are symptoms of a disease, right? And the disease is the federal, the federal scheduling of marijuana generally. It should be descheduled for, in my opinion, for the adult use, retail, recreational market, whatever you want to call it. It should be sort of stand next to alcohol, not stand lower on a list, so that it has to still be dealt with in this strange way through FDA. That's just obviously the adult use part. All the medicinal and medical, nutraceutical, wellness stuff. I mean, all that is going to be dealt with in that world. And I look forward to that. I mean, I think that's the medical side of this. Finally, people are waking up and realizing that there is a ton of very promising medical applications and wellness applications coming from this. And it's hard to predict what'll happen, but we are definitely, the momentum is with us, but we have to be diligent. We have to make sure that we try to prevent issues from popping up, and then we address them immediately when they do.
I love that. It's hard to predict, but it's better to manifest your prediction. Manifest your predictions, says Christian Sederberg. I love that.
Thank you.
All right, so we're here at the end. We got 2 last questions. They kind of sound the same, mm-hmm. But they are different, and I hope that you answered them separately. The last 2 questions are: what has most surprised you in cannabis? That's the first question. And then, what has most surprised you in life? And people are taking this a couple of ways. I'd say about half the time they answered the 2 questions together because of how much time and energy has been spent, just at work, so to speak. But what's your answer to the first question? What has most surprised you in cannabis?
I mean, this one's something I've said before too. What most surprised me getting involved is how powerful medical marijuana is, and how absolutely critically important it is for many, many people, and how it is the difference literally between life and death for many, many people. And I always believed that medical marijuana was something important and something that had touched my family, my life. but not in a way until I was really in it to see people whose lives and livelihoods literally depended on their safe access to medical marijuana, and still does, to this day. That is the thing that, if you want to say surprise, that is the thing that really, frankly shocked me most, and made it really raised the stakes significantly. Medical marijuana is something that is absolutely critical to protect while we're moving forward with retail recreational marijuana. And it's something that, I can't say in words how important it is and how critical it is for many, many, many very good people.
Without question. You just brought up that it, I don't know if that was in passing, but that it has affected your family. We didn't cover that. Please take us through what you're talking about there.
Sure. And, respecting the privacy of members of my family and people that I know, I'll do that. But I will say that I have members of my family that have been impacted in a positive way by medical marijuana. And for me personally, I mean, it's something that has helped to, my own personal medical issues. None life-threatening or anything like that, but certainly nausea and stomach issues that have been a part of my life since I was a baby. That's how I really started to say, wait a minute, what's going on here? I noticed that certain things really helped, and actually other things made it worse with marijuana. And I was actually found that compelling, because that means that it's not all the same. That means that if one makes it way better and one makes it way worse, there was something to this, and that's where I started to explore it. But, family and friends that have been end of life treatments too for very close friends, where they were using medical cannabis to get through chemo, or to actually just get through very painful parts of cancer. These are things that are very important to me, and are very important to everyone in this office. And we have lost some very good friends to chronic conditions that were being treated with cannabis, and it's sort of their mantle and it's their flag that Brian carries every day, a few people in particular. So,
well, that's great, and I can appreciate you respecting privacy of others, but obviously you not only hold the solution close to the chest, you also hold like you said, the mantle close to the chest. And maybe that is the answer to what has most surprised you in life. But is there a different answer there?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that the most surprising thing in life to me, as a person who's very methodical and sort of, I'm a spiritual person, but not a highly religious person or anything like that. What actually has surprised me in life through this whole process is how people say the universe works in strange ways. I've sort of watched and come up with a entirely different appreciation for how everything works. And really, it's what I tell people is I trust the universe, because good or bad, if this person gets elected or that person gets elected, what happens to medical marijuana? What happens to retail marijuana? What happens to all these businesses? What happens if this law gets passed? What happens if that law gets passed? What I have found through all of this is that you trust the universe, you work very hard, and you have people committed to doing something that's right. Things work out in a way that are surprising and really hard to explain.
You've done a decent job of explaining a lot, so thank you so much. Thank you for that last quotable quote of trust the universe. Christian, it's been a pleasure, and I'm looking forward to seeing you very soon.
Absolutely.
Down the line. How about that?
That's great, and thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
You got it. Likewise. What's next? That is the question for the cannabis industry and for ourselves, and that is hard to predict, and that's why Christian urges us to manifest our predictions, and in doing so, trust the universe. A couple of quotable quotes from Christian Sederberg of Vicente Sederberg and the Council on Responsible Cannabis Regulation, a sponsor of this episode.